there's more protection if you know what you're doing with the self-insured program than there is with the fully insured program. Period, end of paragraph.
What's up, everybody? Get ready for the next episode. We got Kevin O'Kane coming on, creator of the Sihra, one of the smartest guys in healthcare. Here he is.
Exposure down by a third if you do it properly.
What you guys didn't know is Kevin also.
Yeah, let's start it this way, is that in 1964, you had the introduction of the Great Society by Lyndon Baines Johnson. And he introduced Medicare Part A and he introduced Medicare Part B. Right? What the question that should be asked is, why did it take until 1992 to introduce Medicare Part C? Right, which was the covering of drugs. We all know that Medicare Part A covered the hospitals, Medicare Part B covered the physicians. Right? But the reason for that is in 1964, when they passed Medicare, right, was drugs only represented 1% of all the claims in the entire United States. So they weren't really an issue back in 1964. All right, so you have to remember the great strides that were made from medicine and the clinical side just from Vietnam itself. That one thing that's called the one magical hour, all right, whether it's an accident in a car or whether it's being shot in Vietnam, is that 1 hour between when that accident happens to getting you on the OR is the critical time, period, end of paragraph. And they learned that in Vietnam. That's why they had what was called dust-offs. Dust-offs were people that were the Hueys used to come in and pick up your wounded and take them away. That was called a dust-off. All right? And a D-U-S-T-O-F-F, dust-off.
Dusting off some dead bodies.
Right. Well, no, these were live personnel, exactly. And then in 74, I started in the insurance business when ERISA was born, Employee Retirement Income Security Act of 74. And it's a hell big difference of studying it out of a book versus living it.
How do you fall into it? Or you just, I'm going to go into healthcare?
My father was in the insurance industry as a debit agent. All right. He never really got into health insurance. All right. And I got into it and was selling a lot in South Florida. Then Massachusetts Mutual said, you know, if you come and visit us, we'll triple your salary and move you to Washington, D.C. And that was really besides being just a big political hotspot, it's the headquarters for all the association business in the United States. All the association business and Taft-Hartley business is right there on Constitution and K. And it's right there in downtown Washington, D.C. So for 20 years, I spent cutting my teeth learning, about the health insurance industry. And I couldn't have got a better education because of the the three firms that were fearful with the greatest education was the Connecticut General, which morphed into Cigna, Aetna, and Mass Mutual. Those were the only three companies that took, either 6 months to a year to train their people.
And now, when you go to Mass Mutual, are you in a retail capacity where you're selling direct to employees?
I am a titled home office employee, which means I can legally bind the insurance company. An agent cannot bind an insurance company. An agent is nothing more than having a contract with the general agent. And the general agent has a contract with the insurance company. I was a titled home office employee of Massachusetts Mutual. And as such, I was first a medical underwriter, then I was a group rep, right? And well, that was another interesting story. We were in a regional meeting one time, and way back when they gave you what is called a dividend retention manual, which was about 200 or 300 pages thick, right? And it had all the reserves and all the calculations and formulas that you need to calculate the rates, all right, for any product Mass Mutual sold. And we went to a regional meeting, and I found out that, let's just say that the actuary that was making the presentation was really severely exaggerating certain points. So I went up to my manager and I said, either he's really exaggerating or he's lying. He said, well, how do you know that? I said, well, I memorized the retention manual. Right? So they ran back to the back room, pulled out a retention manual, found out that I was right. And from that point forward, I started studying to pass all 10 actuarial exams. All right. Now, you normally take one exam a year. All right. I was taking 2 a year for a while and still working a full-time job. So I passed all 10 actuarial exams within 6 years.
And you learn what now?
Well, the actuarial science will tell you one thing, all right, that everything is a regression to the mean. All right. You have your outliers here and there, whatever. All right. I can tell you this, that in every group case out there, that the following is always true. 20% of the participants in the plan produce 80% of the claim. 2 to 4% of the population will produce between 50 to 66% of all the claims, and 1% of the population will produce a third of all the claims. You know, the idea, if you really want to control and manage costs, is you want to be able to control two things. You want to be able to control your exposure, and you want to be able to control your shock losses. If you can control those two things, like I have certain clients that haven't had a rate increase in 20 years. It's a mind-boggling statement when you say that the clients that I work with that use our cost containment techniques are less than 1/2 of what everybody else is paying. So where everybody else is averaging $12,265 per employee per year, my clients run an average cost of $5,700.
So you get in this healthcare industry, you become an actuary. What point do you bridge over to being basically a retail broker and working direct with employers?
Well, that's an interesting story too. What happened was when I worked for Mass Mutual, Pacific Mutual came and said, we need a regional vice president to run the East Coast. And Pacific Mutual hired me to leave Mass Mutual after, 10 years or so with Mass Mutual. And then 2 or 3 years later, Pacific Mutual decided they were going to go out of business. And I'm sitting there going like, wait a minute. I do all the sales. I make all the presentation, yet the broker made all the money. Because the broker would go to the insurance company, Mass Mutual or Pacific Mutual, and they say, I have a company, I want you to go and make your presentation, sell this case for me, but he's the one that got the commissions.
For 40 years, it's never changed.
I think, again, we had an interview with Ed, and he kind of related to the same thing, that back then the GA was essentially the broker in some capacity.
Well, the difference is this, is that,
Or the healthcare industry was.
I made a real big mistake. The real big mistake, I spent 30 years in the industry trying to convince employers that I knew more than their existing consultant, then they ought to fire him and hire me because I could cut their costs in half. And finally I grew up and said, you know what? It's a hell of a lot better just to convince all the brokers out there that I can double your revenue, by using my concepts. All right, so that if you use my concepts, you'll double your revenue within 2 years. All right, so it's my job now not to convince employers that I'm better than their existing consultants, but to make the existing consultants with those employers look brilliant. All right, and then I'm not subject to two things, the law of diminishing returns, because you can only service so many clients. All right, so if I can service 29 accounts on a retail basis, but I can service over 1,000 consultants. All right. And if they have...
Yeah, you have challenges with scale from the retail side. I mean, The bigger companies have scaled, but there's still a...
So the idea here is that we should put together a series of tapes to show a series of interviews to help these consultants be brilliant. To do things that they haven't done before, like sell Waiver Premium For Medical, which no one does. All right?
Waiver Premium For Medical.
Exactly.
What's that?
Huh?
Break that down for us.
Well, if you have a small group, say less than 100 lives, all right, what you'd want to do is make the last thing that you present to the employer is that in group term life insurance, there's a thing called Waiver Premium. All right, and after you've been disabled for a period of 9 months, your employee's premium all right, that has been disabled will be waived by the insurance carrier. That's called a waiver premium provision. All right, but there is a way to do that for the medical side. So what you do is when you present the Blue Cross, Blue Shield, Aetna, Cigna, United, or health insurance plan, you make sure that the last thing you explain to them is the group term life insurance and the waiver premium provision. You say, oh, by the way, would you like some waiver premium for your medical? And they'll say either yes or no, all right? And if they say yes, you pull out a long-term disability application. Right? And in the BOE, business overhead expense section of the insurance policy, you write down his responsibility for the premium that the company has to pay. And then if he ever becomes disabled, the insurance company will pay the contributions that the corporation owns to pay for that medical. Little things like that people don't understand or realize.
So, but you're actuary, you become a healthcare broker, and then you start. Where do you start to find these different strategies and ideas?
That's an interesting story. If you're talking about the Sihra, right, that took almost 20 years to develop. In 1978, right, they were going to modify the Internal Revenue Code to include Section 105H, which is the discrimination test for Section 104 and 105 of the Internal Revenue Code. In other words, right, back in the early 70s, it was commonplace for the broker and the employer to get together and they would sell a high deductible plan, maybe a $200 or $300 deductible. Back then that was high, all right? And the rank and file would have a $200 or $300 deductible, but the employer would establish a medical expense reimbursement plan for the executives and the executives only. So whatever deductibles, copays, and coinsurances the executives were out of pocket, the medical expense reimbursement plan would pay for it. All right, well, Congress didn't like that. All right, so in 1978, they're getting ready to pass a law that said, if you discriminate in favor of the highly compensated, all right, then we're going to have that portion taxed as ordinary income. So the insurance industry ran down to Washington, D.C., and they said, look, only employers discriminate. Insurance companies don't discriminate. They medically underwrite. All right? So what you should do is when you're going to pass that law, you pass it by saying only if the medical expense reimbursement program, the MERP, right, is, or the HRA as we know it today, back then it was called a MERP, all right? But only if it's self-insured is there a discrimination test, not that it's fully insured. So that was the first beginning of the evolution of the beginning of the development of the MERP. Then the second thing happened in 1984, where the J.C. Penney rule was ruled by the Third Circuit Court and the Fifth Circuit Court and was upheld. And what it was is J.C. Penney came out with what is called the head of household rule. And what the head of household rule said was that if your spouse made an income greater than you, all right, then your spouse was no longer eligible for coverage here. All right. Well, the EEOC got involved because J.C. Penney was 85% female. And so they sued on sexual discrimination. And J.C. Penney very successfully argued in court, all right, that they're a corporation with limited means, all right, and this was the best way to expand the coverage amongst the most of the population. And the courts agreed with them, both courts. And when the Supreme Court refused to hear the appeal, then it became tort law. All right, so that was the J.C. Penney rule. Then I got involved with a very large corporation in Ohio called Alphabet. And the president of the firm, he said, Kevin, either you come up with a way to cut my costs by 40%, or I have to move 8,000 employees to Mexico.
And this is one of your retail clients?
Right. So I went around to 7 different plants, telling all the employees that if their spouse made an income greater than them, and remember that Alphabet had 90% employees were female, all right, that their spouses were no longer eligible for coverage. And the wailing and the gnashing of teeth. My husband's program is terrible. My husband's program's contributions are egregious. My husband's network of physicians in my area is terrible. I heard all these complaints from one plan at the next. So finally, when I went back to see the president, I said, there is no amount of money that you can pay me next year to communicate this to all your employees. And then 2 months later, at 2 o'clock in the morning, I woke up and I couldn't go back to sleep for 3 days. And what I did then was put together from the J.C. Penney ruling and in 1978, right, and the alphabet experience to say, you know, I might not be able to save 40%, but I might be able to save 30, 35. Right? And I can take all that wailing and gnashing of teeth if I combine the Merps, right, with the J.C. Penney ruling. So by saying if you evacuate everybody had done spousal carve-outs at that time, and which was like no big deal. But I was the one that came up and said, if you move your entire family elsewhere, we'll reward you and make it so that you're better off, so that you have no copays, no co-insurance, and contributions are either less or we'll give you a bonus. Right? And that would control your exposure, because you're cutting your exposure down by a third if you do it properly. Then the only other thing you need to do beyond that point is to manage your shock losses. And in managing the shock losses, that's identifying that 1% or 2% of the population that's responsible for 33 to 50% of all the claims, and managing that person's claims either through claims avoidance or managing the claims themselves, like we had with the individual at lunch today that has the special agreements with all these special providers at rates that are well below reasonable customary charges. So what you have to remember, that every premium dollar that's out there, this is always true, that premium equals crap. Claims, reserves, administration, and pooling charges. In every premium dollar, whether it's life insurance, disability, medical, property and casualty, bonds, it doesn't matter. If it's a premium, you have to have those 4 basic components. Right? And the idea, and this is where the biggest mistake is made, right, is that 4%, in other words, the A in crap is generally only 4 pennies out of every dollar. So 4 cents every dollar is used to administer these plans, but reserves eventually change into claims. Pooling charges eventually change into claims. Pooling charges are where the insurance you pay the insurance company a premium and saying, I'm willing to accept this amount of responsibility of risk. Once it exceeds that, whether it's an aggregate or a specific, you reimburse me. Right? Those are pooling charges, whether it's internal pooling charge for premium or a self-funded program. Those are pooling charges. So what I'm saying is 4 cents of every dollar does not go for the payment of claims. What should be done is you should be paying 12 to 15 cents out of every dollar and reduce your 96 cents by half. All right? By paying people to control and manage the claims better than the way they are right now.
And the industry is obsessed with the fact of being tricked by the major insurance corporations. Say, listen, we'll lower your admin fee. We'll waive it.
I was at a case that was
but we'll just hit you every other spot.
Right here in this county. In fact, it was Orange County. And the VP of HR was so proudly announcing that they shopped their plan 3 to 5 years. And I'm sitting there going, they're making the same stupid mistake that all the other...
Years.
Yeah, they're still making the same mistake. All right, they're shopping the administration. All right, they're sitting there going, what they should be doing is, can we pay somebody to cut our claims costs in half?
Well, I think the industry and probably the brokers have done a good job for it, and we'll talk about your thoughts on insurance brokers in a minute, is as Craig would say, we've become the elephant trainer and trained them to think that there's nothing you can do about healthcare costs and claims. But we can focus on these little fixed costs, and if we can get that cheaper, hey.
The amazing thing is for me to hear in a great many different times, all right, where I hear these ignorant brokers sitting there saying, all right, I have them fully insured because they're adverse to risk. There's more protection if you know what you're doing with the self-insured program than there is with the fully insured program. Period, end of paragraph.
Explain that.
Well, when you have an ongoing loss, all right, the ability, you want to jump in right away to control and manage that claims, either through utilization, through claims management, disease management, or claims avoidance. All right. If you have fully insured, you're relegating that responsibility to the insurance carrier. Now, remember, the insurance carrier doesn't care to them what your claims are, all right, because all they're going to do is add a percentage on top of what your claims are on your renewal, right? And eventually they'll rate from a deficit position, all right, to recoup the prior year's losses, all right? So if there's a large ongoing claims, they have no incentive to stop and get rid of that claim immediately. All right, shit. All they're going to do is jack your claims up, your rates up at the end of the year. All right, where on a self-insured basis, you react to it immediately to try to see how do we mitigate that claim, control that claim, all right, or eliminate the claim. Look, here's the amazing part that's so shocking. Most of these corporations' largest expense beyond salaries is their health and welfare. All right. So you have a case of 1,000 lives that's spending, and this is quite typical, $14 to $15 million a year. Why is that not put out to bid? Why are those claims not put out to bid before the claims incurred? All right. Why don't you manage those claims prospectively? You got $15 million expense and you're not going to put anything out to bid? I'll bet you nothing else in that corporation, the $15 million is sent out without a bid. Okay? No one does anything to try to control managed claims other than J&K. So it's our job to educate these employers and the consultants, right, particularly the consultants, as to give them tools to help them control and manage your claims better than they're, and pay them for it. Much more than they're making right now.
I want to go back to the retail side again. You're selling self-funded health plans back in 1974. I've got brokers that tell me as recent as a few weeks ago that say, I can't. It's too risky. My employers don't like it. It's too risky. They're 100-something lives, and they don't want to look at self-funded. To 2019, they can't sell a self-funded health plan.
It's only due to ignorance. Look, you can't fix stupid, so you have to fall upon ignorance. All right. The idea is the spec has to be inversely proportional to the exposure. So if you have a 1,000-man group, I might recommend $250,000 to a $400,000 specific. If I have a 35-employee life group, I'll say, okay, get a $25,000 specific. So what you do is you identify to the employer based on its cash flow analysis as to what his risk tolerance level is. Now, anybody that's really fully experienced in self-funding realizes that for the first 2 or 3 months, there's little or no claims. So you stockpile that money and set it aside.
Not all of them, believe it or not. I see people give case studies after 4 months talking about how good the group's running.
Oh yeah, those are great. It's like story time. It's like they're reading to their children.
Yeah. So the idea here is you had the ability to stockpile your surplus before the claims really come in. All right? And then if you're really smart, look, I have employers that are calling me up saying, hey, I got a hemophiliac, go get an individual policy and get this thing off the plan. All right, so, but the insurance company, once again, it just proves, does not have an incentive to control that cost.
Sure.
All right, so, look, what we want to do is this. We have the ability to do the following. If you get the right concierge service involved with the claims adjudication process prospectively, you can increase the quality of medicine being delivered to the population and decrease the cost by half. Excuse me. But you must do it, you must do it prospectively.
Kevin, some brokers out there aren't sure what that means.
In advance.
Okay, thanks.
Okay. The idea here is this, is that when you get to control the utilization of the group, but look, I don't want you going to this hospital right here, right? Because they're a D-rated hospital when it comes to cardiovascular services, all right? I want you to go to an A-rated hospital for two reasons. One, you're going to get better care, and two is an A-rated hospital is 22% less expensive than a D-rated hospital. All right, so I want you to go into this hospital, which is going to give you better medical treatment. All right, you do that prospectively. You don't do it retrospectively. You say, oh, you went to that hospital? That's a shitty hospital. Why'd you go to that one? Look, you don't know that if you have a CABG procedure, you do not want to go to Johns Hopkins, and you do not want to go to the Cleveland Clinic, and you do not want to go to Tufts University. And those are all huge teaching institutions in the East Coast. And you don't want to go to Johns Hopkins. They have problems, I mean, not Johns Hopkins, but the Cleveland Clinic for certain colon procedures because they have a terrible time with staph infections there. We know this stuff. All right, the general public doesn't. General public doesn't even know where and how to access information that we have. We can feed this to all our consultants by saying, make sure that your people use this orthopedic surgeon here, all right, or this cardiovascular surgeon over here, or this hospital over here, but don't go to this one. I screwed up 4 years ago. My own employee, all right, his brother-in-law went to the hospital, and so finally I did a review of the hospital in North Carolina, which shall remain nameless. And I said, Tom, get him out of that hospital immediately. Well, the decision out of surgery was the next day, and I was too late, and whatever, and they had the surgery. So what happened? It's a D-rated hospital. They perforated his colon. Peritonitis set in. They damn near killed him. All right, so when I ask an employer two questions, and they're very key, critical questions, is that, are you interested in improving the quality of medicine being delivered to your membership and taking the necessary steps to do so? And are you interested in cutting your costs in half and taking the necessary steps to do so? Because if you answer no to either one, I'm not interested in doing business with you. Because I make more money this way than this way.
Can you think of any other business where the incentives are so perverse that you actually make more money when you screw up without any consequence? I can't think of any other business that exists other than healthcare.
Yeah, it's,
where if they mess you up or you get an infection, it's actually good for the bottom line.
Bill you again.
Actually, I had a heart procedure done, and they recalled the St. Jude lead, which was the lead that goes from the AED to the ventricle, and every now and then I would get an electrical shock that would put me to my knees. Now, I'm a former Marine that's decorated. All right. So finally, when they replaced the St. Jude lead that was recalled, guess what? All those shocks went away. Can you imagine that? So then I go to sue them. Well, you can't sue them. Why not? Oh, they're protected by Congress. You can't sue them for much more than $5,000. Well, blank you and the horse you rode in on is what I said too. So yes, you're absolutely right. It is all feathered against the general population. The general population doesn't get to know where the doctors bury all their mistakes and which ones had complications in the past, which one hasn't, and why would you want to go to this one procedure? Look, 5 years ago, we were involved in a case. The CEO of the corporation, 1,000 lies, was getting ready to have a hip replacement, and it was going to cost $78,000 for the anesthesia, the facility, and the surgeon. All right, so in this particular instance, the way this plan was set up, prospectively, they had to shop. So they sent it out to 9 orthopedic board-certified surgeons that had performed the procedure 200 times over the previous 2 years with no complications. All right. And some came in at 12,000, some came in at 18,000, some came in at 15,000. These are all board-certified surgeons where the total cost for the surgery, the anesthesia, and the facility was going to cost between $12,000 and $18,000. This guy, the CEO, had chosen this assistant or this general surgeon that was not board-certified and had done the procedure 3 times in the past 2 years, not 200, and had one complication. So we went to this president of this firm and we said, we don't understand this. We sent you 9 surgeons that were orthopedic surgeons. where the costs range anywhere between $12,000 and $18,000 for everything, right, where there was no complications. You choose a guy, right, where he's only performed it 3 times in the past 2 years, once with complications, and the total bill is going to come to $78,000. How'd you choose this guy? You know what the response was? He was in the Blue Cross network. You're sitting there going like, they have gone from so much to so bad. Right? I remember when PPOs didn't even exist. I'm that old. I'm so old, reasonable and customary did not exist when I first started in the industry. CRVS, California Relative Value Scale, came out with by Mass Mutual and Aetna. We were the first ones out with it in the industry, and it was the first time that differentiated between an appendectomy and a hysterectomy, because they didn't have reasonable and customary charges prior to that.
Just think about that. No PPOs, no HMOs, no drug cards.
Well, we did have
no
Kaiser
PPOs.
Permanente. I mean, that's the other thing that brokers don't do today. Can you tell me where the first HMO was?
I'm going to guess Kaiser.
Right? Where was the first Blue Cross and Blue Shield?
No idea. Wasn't born.
Baylor University, 1934. All right. See, we also have to study our industry's history and how it evolved and how the insurance company got into the business. The insurance companies got into the business because of the price and wage controls of World War II. And they were trying to give their benefits. They started giving out benefits then because they have wage and price controls to entice new employees. They put in. That's how split dollar was performed. Split dollar was invented during the World War II. Wage and price control. Didn't know that, did you? You know, they were trying to figure out ways. If you do it on an endorsement methodology, or is it the collateral? One of the two. All right, methodology of your split dollar, that they could get money from the corporation to the executives, income tax free, and get around their wage and price controls. And it was a dumb, stupid insurance agent that invented split dollar. All right, so much for insurance agents being stupid. All right, so you know the idea here is that you want to take concepts that are sound, that work, that are logical, improve the quality of medicine, and do your bidding on the cost of these services prospectively the best you can, or evacuate the claim and get somebody else to pay it for you.
So go back to the individual policies, the hemophiliacs. Talk to me about, you start getting these ideas, you start ripping through tax code and things, and how do you figure this out? And
well, see, that's another thing. The foundation approach is so unique that no one in the industry absolutely, unequivocally, I can state with severe certainty that no one is using Section 2503E other than J&K. The problem was this. I had another retail client, and the attorney was, let's just say he was a real pain in the neck. All right? He was not a deal maker, he was a deal breaker. So when I turned around and he was evacuating the large claimants, right, a lot of the stuff that he said, you know, was so far out left field. Anyway, the first thing was, well, it could be a potential HIPAA violation because you're targeting the large claimants. There's no loss. They're getting better benefits. Who's going to complain that they have no contributions, no deductibles, no co-pays, no co-owned? So that argument really should be scratched right away. And that the second argument was that we were discriminating. Yeah, we were discriminating in favor of, not against. Once again, they're getting better benefits, no contributions, no out-of-pocket expense. And lastly, it had to be taxed as ordinary income. But Section 2503E of the code, and I spent a lot of time reading the code and to try to find, and Obamacare and the regulations associated with, to find out where the loopholes are. So the loophole in 2503E is that you can gift to anybody an unlimited amount as long as you pay the providers directly. Well, what makes J&K so unique is our ID card, all right? And by the way, if you look at the Q&As, all right, the IRS puts out on 2503E, the one example it gives is that you cannot give somebody a $1,000 check and say, endorse it over to the doctor. That will not work. All right, it has to be gifted directly to the provider that performed the services. Well, when we give the individual policy from the foundation to the individual, and the foundation pays the premium, we also give them what is called a J&K ID card. And that J&K ID card only reimburses providers, not the individual. All right. And so therefore, the money inures the individual income tax free. All right. And there can be no possible discrimination or no possible HIPAA problems because the employer is not making those decisions, the foundation is.
Gotcha. So it takes the broker out, it takes the employer out.
The broker's out, the employer's out, the claim's out, and all you do. So this small little group in Louisiana, we put that family into an individual policy for the mother and daughter. All right. That father was been in the CFO or CEO's office and the VP's HR's office every day since we've done that, on his knees thanking them, because what happens is he's saving $15,000 a year, all right, because he no longer has to pay the deductibles, the copays, the co-insurances for that individual policy. All right. And the employer's cost was reduced from $3 million to less than $600,000.
So the employer's on his knees thanking you. Is that where is it?
Right. All right. So look, it is not unusual in the beginning. We started this stuff 20 years ago, right? Evacuating large claimants and putting in the Sihras, where we would routinely go in and reduce costs 60%. All right. Yes, I said 60%. We'd cut the cost in half. All right. And then they would never get a rate increase. We have clients that have put this program in place since 2001 and haven't seen a rate increase in 20 years. It's because we're controlling and managing the claims along the way. Because the 4 cents went to 12 to 15 cents because they paid me a boatload of money to cut their claims cost in half. Right?
How should brokers be talking to certain clients or prospects about managing risk like this? And
the whole school changed. In the old days, it used to be the insurance carriers went out and negotiated contracts with hospitals and doctors and not anesthesiologists, because they're never agreed to. Anyway, so, and they'd go in and they say, okay, we're going to pay you this for this CPT-4 number or this DRG or however the claim comes in. All right. So, rather than, it's and then they'll come back and say, you should do business with us because we have the deepest discounts. So if you have a claim's going to cost less because we have the deepest. Well, that's passé now because of reference-based pricing. If anybody was to sit there and say, I should do business with them because they had the deepest discounts, I'd be sitting there saying, have you heard of reference-based pricing lately? All right. So the reality of this whole situation is that with reference-based pricing and the correct concierge service to direct the individuals, all right, to the best providers, which generally speaking are the least expensive providers, right, or to evacuate the large claimants on an ad hoc basis, enables you to control and manage your claims cost. Right? When I said have other people pay your claims cost for you, how about a variable copay for your drugs? If you go to the drugstore, right, and you go and ask for Harvoni, right, they're going to sit there and say, and you go to the drugstore and say, call up the drug manufacturer and see how much relief he's going to give me. They're going to ask you two questions. Do you make less than 400% of the poverty line? Or, asked another way, do you make less than $120,000 a year? And about 99% of the people in the United States can say yes to that. And the second question they're going to ask you is, do you have any insurance? You can say, yeah, I have insurance coverage through Aetna or Cigna or United or Blue Cross or whatever, but I have a $100 specialty copayment for your Harvoni drug because it's a specialty drug. And the copayment for specialty drugs is $100. So Harvoni says, we had no problem. We'll send your pharmacist immediately a check for $100. If you had turned around and had a variable deductible on your copay for your drugs, and turn around and said that your out-of-pocket expense was that your exposure or out-of-pocket was not $100, but $7,350, they'd send them a check for $7,350.
Because they want to bill that plan $55,000, baby.
So the idea, though, but at least you got the $7,000 relief where you didn't get it before.
Sure.
So what you're trying to do is shift the cost back to, I want to shift the cost back to anywhere but my employer, my client.
At the end of the day, you're representing the clients. What do you say to people that go, that's not fixing healthcare, Kevin? I'm trying to fix healthcare.
You're just shifting costs. You're not.
Well, if you want to solve healthcare, then you shift the cost the way I've been espousing. Then you have the federal government reinsure every individual policy above $50,000. That will bring all the insurance carriers back into the marketplace. And then what you do is you have the federal government review those claims of those individual policies and say, oh, you're the surgeon that charged 10 times greater than reasonable customary. Oh, you're the surgeon that had that person come back into your office every other day to jack up your utilization. You keep on practicing medicine like that, we'll make sure no one pays your EIN number again. That's how you fix medicine.
Do you think shifting the high cost of healthcare on these major claimants to the government, they're going to step and say, whoa, you can't be charging us?
Look, they've already have Senate subcommittees. I even have it on tape if you want to see it, where the Senate subcommittees are talking about reinsuring individual policy, and they're having arguments as to whether they do it on a dollar amount or a disease definition. So for these diseases, we'll reinsure it, or for this dollar amount, we'll reinsure it. But they're already reviewing it in Senate subcommittees as we speak.
It's kind of like a hybrid of the old high-risk pools.
Right.
Yeah, that's what talk's been, come back with the high-risk pool. What do you say to people that say, well, this is why we need Medicare for all? Then the government would step in, fix it, not pay this much, and we'd be like Canada.
God help us all. And how long does it take for a knee surgery in Canada? 2 years?
Depends on how important you are. If you're old, Kevin, I go before you. I jump the line.
If you got cash, you just come to the United States to get operated on and pay the surgeon cash.
Look.
What happens when those guys aren't available?
I don't know any.
My father told me his clients that he deals with in Canada, he sells produce. When they need surgery done, they come to America and they pay cash. Because they don't want to wait in line.
All the Scandinavian companies that have 60, 70% income tax rates, and they have all great health insurance. You don't see any innovation in the Scandinavian countries. You don't see anybody in Europe inventing a fucking thing
You can curse on this.
when it comes to any type of innovations. All right, all the innovations comes from the United States. Look, you really want to get technical? Write into your plan document that if you have a transplant, you got to follow John E. Stargill's medical protocols in order to be a covered medical expense. You want to control claims? Right? If you don't use his protocols, you're subject to rejection drugs the rest of your life that's going to cost $100,000 a year. Use his protocols, you don't need the drugs. So before, where we just had to be part accountant, part lawyer, part mathematician to be a medical underwriter to try to control, you're dealing in the most complicated industry in the entire United States medical field. You got to combine legal, actuarial sciences, medical underwriting, clinical, right, all of it. Right? How else do we know that CABG, a coronary artery bypass graft, is best served not going to the Cleveland Clinic or Johns Hopkins? All right. Now,
doesn't that explain why brokers only want to sell fully insured cases?
They wanted to put everything on a spreadsheet and said, I went to all these 10 companies and they gave the best rate, and this is the best rate and the best product for this, that, and the other, rather than they're attacking the symptoms and not the disease itself. All right, there's no real solution to it on that basis. You haven't solved anything. You have to get back to crap. If you haven't done anything to manage claims, right, you haven't solved the problem.
So you're selling self-funded health plans 40 years ago. Brokers can't sell them now. You've come up with these creative solutions. What is your thought? How were you able to sell the Sihra program when you had no references, when it was new? I mean, because these guys can't sell self-funded health plans. God help them, but
67% of employees are covered by them in the United States.
67% now. Yeah.
I look back, for what we have as support for our consultants right now. We have a plethora, a library of testimonials for both employees and employers, all right, that testifying of and or pertaining to the Merps. And the whole shooting match all right, is a completely different. We have support material in both in presentations and flyers and
Fly this guy out.
well, and we have enrollers that will go out too to make the presentation for the employees. We help in development of the PowerPoint presentation, the communication devices, interfacing with their software. I mean, we have a pretty sophisticated rosé program putting out to support these consultants on these cases. Look, one of the things your consultants should get to realize, if they're really smart and they followed the concepts that are being presented here, they will double their income in less than 3 years. It's really that simple. If you get away from doing what you've been doing and transition your existing book of business, which is probably mostly a fully insured book, to a self-funded book where you're getting a percentage of the savings because you're helping them control and manage your claims, and because you're working on a weekly basis to do this stuff, you'll double your income. It's really that simple. Right? You can learn by actually going to our library. Right? And if you go to that library and you pull out all the assistance that we have with all the material pertaining to self-insurance, right? Yeah. Look, it's not really difficult. You can marry the two together like this. In the fully insured side, you have a contract between the employer and the insurance company. It's called a master certificate. And underneath the master certificate is what is called a booklet. When you transition over to the self-insured plan side, all right, the master certificate on the self-insured side, it's called a plan document. The plan document gives way to what is called a summary plan description, which is supposed to be a snapshot of the plan document, explaining the material differences in the master contract. So when you have the plan document, which tells us what the plans are, and the appeal processes and everything else, the SPD, summary plan description, is a subset of that. Just like the booklet is a subset of the master certificate. Only this is self-insured and this is fully insured. But the neat thing here is you get to weave in your own controls. You can put in, and you can design the plan the way you want it, rather than the way the insurance company has it filed with the state insurance commissioner's office.
Any last words for brokers out there watching?
You have to evolve. You have to continually learn. All right. When they make changes to the code, we have to take advantage of the exploitment of it. All right? And all hell's going to break loose in a little while, all right, when that Fifth Circuit Court finally makes its decision on whether Obamacare is unconstitutional or not. My bet is they're going to come back and say, it's unconstitutional. If you want some innovative ideas, you go to small boutique consulting houses. If you want fancy glossy reports that justify why your cost is twice as expensive as your competitors, you go to the big ABC houses.
We'll end it there. Kevin O'Kane. Thanks, pal.
Thank you.
So this is the new wine cellar here, huh?
This is the new wine cellar. Our Bordeaux section. No, this is our cab section over here. And this appears to be, ooh, it's a really good wine.
So we got the red here, the white over there.
Well, we have, this is all Italian here, and yet this is Italian here as well. Sassicaia, Ornellaia, the first gross of Italy. Then you have the first gross in the United States. We have Lafitte, Latour, Lynchbogs. Right? You have Chateau Margaux. Chateau Haut-Brion.
How many bottles do you have?
In this wine cellar, it's the smaller of the two, so there's like 3,600 bottles here. But the one in Pittsburgh, we have another 4,000.
And what do you plan on doing? So many bottles of wine, you sell them? Are you going to sell them? You're going to give them away? Gifts? Drink them? You can't drink them all.
We give away about 300-400 bottles a year. J&K gives to their own existing clients and their own existing brokers they do business with.
I got my first the other day. Sold the first Sihra. I got two nice bottles.
So we'll have to send you home with one. But I don't know what you want. You have Barolas, Barbarescos, Amaronis, you have...
I don't know much about wine. Remember, you got me drinking wine coming here.
Oh, well, then. Right. This is a very nice Merlot. All right, this is from the Right Bank of Bordeaux. It is a Saint Emilion. It's a Grand Cru. All right, and I wouldn't share it with anybody. Oh my God, you shouldn't have that. That's a 2015. That's an unbelievable year. And would you believe that this little bottle right here is $1,000?
Oh.
Dechem.
What is it? What kind of wine?
It's a Sauterne.
Which is what, a white?
Yes, but what makes that grape different is that in other grapes where they pick the whole clusters, here they pick them one grape at a time. One grape at a time.
And where is it made? California?
No. Curse you. No. That's
I know nothing.
That's French. Dechem.
And what do we have here? These
This
are the
is
special.
rated, well, this is another one. Now, this bottle doesn't look like much, but this is rated a perfect score, all right, a 100. Value on this is probably $2,000. This one is also from the Pauillac region, one of my favorite regions, Chateau Pichon Liguel, all right, and that's also rated 100. These are two colognes. This is from a very special area.
I think this is what you gave me the other day, no?
Yeah, well, no, I'm not going to give you more than one of those. All right, but two colognes are like unbelievable in the Napa area. It's synonymous to the Pauillac region in France. So, and we still have.
This is your hobby.
Yeah.
Outside of healthcare.
I like surprising people and give them gifts. Every time my wife and I go out to dinner, we always share our wine with strangers. I mean, one time we went out and we took 4 bottles of wine, and there was two couples a couple over there and a couple over there. That couple was my wife's age, all right, and that couple was much older than me, much older. So we sent them over, so much so that they spent 20 minutes at our table. They, on the other hand, never came to the table, but we sent them over enough wine where they had 4 or 5 glasses apiece that night. So at the end of the night,
It's a good night.
at the end of the night, the lady comes by the table and says, "Thank us for the wine." She goes, "Young man." I go like, "Oh yeah, okay, fine, don't hit me."
Young man.
Yeah. So you're the first man in 51 years to buy me a drink other than my husband. And today's my 94th birthday.
Holy cow.
Well, we were checking the papers the next morning to make sure that they made it home alive because how much they had to drink that night.
So what are we having tonight? We're having something. Guys, we're about to have some steaks, some good wine. What are we picking?
Well,
You know I like the white.
probably,
I like the white now.
Oh, you like the white?
little
Oh,
Sauvignon.
You do you? Okay, well then, we have just had a new batch come in. All right, and where did she put it?
It's like a kid in a candy store here.
Well, that's the other problem with trying to find this stuff sometimes. This is a Sauvignon Blanc. All right, and Robert Mondavi in the 60s thought he'd try a marketing ploy by calling it Fumé Blanc, but it's an unbelievable Sauvignon Blanc and extremely difficult to find and next to impossible to buy.
And we're gonna have it for dinner with some nice steaks. Kevin O'Kane, everyone. What you guys didn't know is Kevin also went to culinary school.
Ballymaloe Cookery School in Ireland for 2-3 weeks. CIA in New York, Johnson Wells in Rhode Island, and Miami Culinary Institute of Arts. All right. But that's a long time ago. I don't even think Miami's even around anymore.